That's the end.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Nick. I appreciate this. I'd love to talk about toughness and how we can achieve it. And everything that I wanted to say today is right here in my pocket on the travel drive. But never mind that. Now it's on a pad in front of me. I do want to talk about what I call toughness, which means essentially resistance to stress and to aging, and especially to fill you in on the what I would call the science of toughness, which is what that book that Judy just inherited is about. By the way, I wrote that book with the idea that this is going to ensure my future retirement financially, and that I would probably have a problem getting rid of some of my wealth as a result of the book. But the publisher who was looking for that book looked at it as other folks had before and said, this is an academic book. This is not a book that's going to appeal to people to read who are sort of normal people. And indeed, it's turned out to be that way. I have had to give up the whole idea of the yacht. It's gone, and so on and so forth. But anyway, it was an adventure to write it, and it does get sold as an academic book. I was shocked when it was first published that the English publisher was selling it for 120 pounds, so it's about 150 bucks. Yeah, come on, who's going to buy this book? And it turned out I was right. No one was going to buy it. So we're talking today mostly about happiness, and to some extent, as I came in, we were talking about dopamine, which has a lot to do with happiness, with the long poem about that. So much of what I'm going to say really relates to dopamine, in some sense, dopamine and the other major neurotransmitters, because I'm going to talk really about how cognitive stimulation and physical exercise and nutrition, those are the things I'm going to focus on, influence the balance of our neurochemistry, which has everything to do with whether or not we are happy and content and feeling motivated and so forth. So with that as an intro, I want to talk a little bit first about just name a couple of things about the brain and about neurochemistry, because that's really what gets influenced by exercise, cognitive stimulation, and some dietary elements. The hippocampus, you all probably actually know about, and I don't need to tell you about. The hippocampi, one on each side of the brain, sort of begin towards the midline of the brain, come out towards the ear. They're a structure that is named for seahorse, which is what hippocampus really translates to. And this is where our memories get consolidated. So as we experience the episodes of our lives, the episodes have components that are emotional and cognitive, and we have visual components to the episodes, these memories. And the hippocampus brings in or takes in these various different modalities, various different components of this episodic memory, pushes them together, consolidates them, so that essentially it feels like a memory of something, a memory of arriving here today and listening to a poem about dopamine, for example, which has all kinds of information and emotional and the whole visual thing. These components of the memory get stored in different areas of the brain, which is kind of interesting. So the visual parts get stored way in the back of the brain. where the visual centers are, emotional stuff gets centered, gets um, stored in areas called the limbic system and so forth. When you remember these memories, the hippocampus goes back to work and reassembles all those components that it draws from different areas of the brain, pushes them together into what feels like a consolidated whole memory of the thing, not a bunch of components, but a real whole. The hippocampus is absolutely vital to our lives. It's where it's not where the memory gets stored, but it's where it gets made in a sense. And when we lose our hippocampal function, as we do with the onset of dementia and the sliding of age-induced cognitive decline, we lose our lives. We lose the stories of your lives, of your life. You essentially lose yourself. So the hippocampus is absolutely vital, and it's one of the first most fragile areas of the brain, perhaps because it's so plastic, which of course is a term you all know what it means. It just means the flexibility, the changing of the brain as we remember things and so forth. Because it's got to be so plastic. It's got to be so fluid, so changeable to handle different memory now than 5 minutes ago. It's the most fragile. And as we slip into cognitive decline, it's the part that tends to go first. And you've seen that if you've watched, and I'm sure everybody has, you've watched people slide into early depression in old age and so forth, and you see this memory thing is usually, especially with Alzheimer's, the thing that goes first. Okay, enough about the bad stuff. One of the things that, well, a little bit more about the bad stuff. As these changes occur, some of the drivers of the changes are the changes in the neurochemistry as we age and as we experience stress. One of the things to note about that is that aging and stress lead to brain changes that are identical. Keep that in mind as you think about how important it is to keep stress levels in your lives minimized. Because if you want to just age your brain, then live a life that is stress-filled. And stress, by the way, is not, as it is sometimes defined by some folks as just sort of a really busy life. That's being really busy and being really challenged is not what is meant by stress. Stress ought to really usually have the term dis in front of it, so it sounds like distress, because it's those negative things, those negative mental things that you want to avoid. You don't want to avoid engaging yourself in extremely challenging activities, so forth, whether they be physical or mental. Those are good for you. Okay. Prefrontal cortex area that's sort of over the eyeballs here is where we do most of our problem solving. People call it the executive center or executive functions, and so forth. That's another area that's reasonably fragile and begins to decline as we age, and certainly begins to decline if we begin to slip into any kind of dementia. So it's those areas of the brain, hippocampi, prefrontal cortex, that we're most concerned with keeping healthy. And happily, when we talk about the positive impacts of cognitive stimulation or physical exercise or affectionate activities, which fits in a little more closely with today's theme, when we think about those sorts of things, the areas that they influence the most in a positive sense are those that are most fragile in a negative sense. So it's the hippocampus and the area around it and the prefrontal cortex and so forth that get most of the positive impact from these positive things that we can do. Specifically, the neurochemistry that plays such a role in the health of our neural structures tends to be first the group of neurochemicals we call the neural transmitters, of which we have been schooled on dopamine quite a bit. It's the motivational chemistry in the brain. Although it's mostly associated with happiness and positive moods, really it's more appropriately thought of as that which fuels our motivation, our drive to do various things. Other neurotransmitters that you know of course, are serotonin, which you probably know tends to be low when you're experiencing depression or very tired. Noradrenaline, which is similarly one of those activating neurochemistry chemicals in the brain. And acetylcholine, which is the neural transmitter that's mostly important around the hippocampus. So if acetylcholine levels get low, then you have difficulty remembering things and so forth. So if I'm going to leap way ahead now to where I intended to end up talking about nutrition, you got to think about choline levels in your food. There are some nutritionists who believe that high levels of Alzheimer's in Britain are because the nutrition standards in Britain do not include standards about choline levels, in encouraging people to consume foods that have good choline levels. Choline tends to be high in wheat germ, and it tends to be high in eggs. So that egg a day idea that took over from the great fear of eggs from 3 decades or so ago, when we were told, they'd kill us with the cholesterol. Having a regular egg is a really good idea because there aren't an awful lot of foods with choline in them. You can also buy choline supplements. My dear wife Karen and I use a capsule of choline supplement every day, simply because we are convinced having good choline levels makes a lot of sense. Choline contributes to the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. It's a major component, of course. Choline is of acetylcholine. And acetylcholine is, again, that neural transmitter that is allowing us to form memories in the hippocampus and to then store them throughout. So, leaping ahead where I shouldn't be. The mental stimulation, how come that works? Well, it works because whenever neurons fire a lot repeatedly because you're learning something new, or you're performing some activity that's stimulating, causing some cognitive domains. Whenever those neurons are repeatedly firing, they not only require a neural transmitter in order for one neuron to activate another, to bridge the gap in the synapse between the neurons, the neural transmitter has to be released. Everybody knows about neurotransmitters, dopamine and so forth. Neurotropin is a very similar term, but neurotropins are like growth hormones. And whenever the neurons get really active in one circuit or another, they tend to release in that neighborhood where those neurons are firing, they tend to release these growth hormones, these neurotropins, of which the one you read about the most is called brain-derived neurotropic factor, and it's always written BDNF for obvious and good reasons. So BDNF gets released when the neurons get very active, and these neurotropins, these growth factors in the brain, cause new neurons and new synapses to be developed. Even in brains as old as mine, and I'm probably the oldest brain here, new neurons get developed in response to that kind of neural activity. They get developed mostly in just a couple of areas of the brain, and one of them, as you might expect, is in the area of the hippocampus. There's a specific slice of the hippocampus called the dentate gyrus, which you don't need to remember for any. And that's where the new ones get born, if you will, out of neural stem cells that have been sitting there your whole life. Your whole life, you've been carrying these same neural stem cells, and they just have been waiting for something to come along and kind of give them the kick to become real neurons, or other of the cells that develop in brains. So brain structures develop as a result of brain activity via these chemicals called neurotrophins. I'll tell you about just one study that illustrates this sort of thing and it's one of the best studies that I know. There are a number of similar studies in which people in language schools have been studied, but this particular one is about German medical students. At the end of their second year or so, they face an exam called a physicum. So the physicum is this thing that's going to determine whether they're going to go on past the end of their second year. And so it's scary and requires intense study. The research that I'm speaking of use brain scans, MRIs, looking at the specific areas of the hippocampus and some of the frontal areas associated with the kind of study these folks were doing. 3 months before the physicum, before these people faced the physicum, at the time of the physicum, the exam, and 3 months after, they did brain scans, which means this is pretty expensive research because these scans are, they're not trivial things to do. They, $100,000 worth of equipment and so forth. Compared with college students who were not facing this kind of really significant exam, the size of the hippocampus and the size of the prefrontal cortex, a size you can actually see in a brain scan, change in size you can see in a brain scan. These brains grew in the 3 months between the time of beginning studying before the exam up until the time of the exam. Both areas, prefrontal cortex and hippocampus, grew noticeably, statistically significantly compared to themselves when they started, the med students compared to themselves when they started, and compared to the control group of just regular old college students, who themselves, of course, were experiencing stimulation. So they might have been getting some brain growth as well. Well, neat. Both areas expanded at a significant level in the 3 months preceding, and although the prefrontal cortex then leveled off in terms of size in the next 3 months, the hippocampus kept on growing for 3 months, even past that period of 3 months of intense studying. Wow. I mean, wow, that's just, when I first read that stuff and got into this, it just blew me away. Everybody, I'm a psychologist, so I know, like all academic psychologists, that it's not true that our brains stop growing and the neurons just die and so forth as we get older. Other things happen as well. So I knew all that, but to actually see that there was growth sufficient in these adults, 30-year-olds, growth sufficient to actually see it on a brain scan as a result of 3 months of study, that's inspiring. That's enough to say, maybe I shouldn't watch Jeopardy every night. Maybe I should be doing something, a little bit more brain grabbing than that. Very similar, even more powerful stuff comes from the research on physical exercise. Most of what's been studied over the years has been aerobic exercise, but the kind of stuff that involves lifting and so on and so forth also plays a big role and is much more reported on these days, this year or the last 2 or 3 years, than used to be the case when aerobic exercise was touted. So exercise is probably the most efficient, the most effective things you can do for brain growth and cognitive improvement, delaying cognitive decline and so forth. Even more than cognitive stimulation, physical exercise has shown in studies across 4 decades to be absolutely the way. If you had to choose a single thing, so emphasize nutrition or emphasize cognitive stimulation or emphasize physical exercise, if it were a single thing, do the exercise. But they don't all, those things don't overlap. The impacts on brain and cognition from cognitive stimulation or physical exercise or nutrition, they're all different. They often operate through similar means. There are some nutrients that when you consume them, they increase the level of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, that growth hormone in the brain. They increase brain levels of that just by consuming them. But you also get them vastly increased as a result of both mental stimulation and physical exercise. The mental stimulation impact on the brain is sort of easy to understand because it follows a kind of a use it or lose it logic, doesn't it? The logic that I was talking about a little while ago. You use those neurons, they emit some neurotropins. The neurotropins cause, well, I didn't say this before, but they turn on some genes, they activate some genes in the brain that then produce proteins that then produce the neurons and the synapses that we want to see blooming in there. So that's how it works. The chemical activates the gene produces other chemicals, in this case, mostly proteins, and you get some growth of tissue. And all that's really cool. So we can understand that as a result of mental stimulation. All right, the story I just told was a story of mental stimulation. Well, how come taking my legs out for a walk every day is going to do even better stuff in the brain? That's not a use it or lose it sort of logic. So using my legs is going to cause my hippocampi to be healthier. Nature does some shortcuts. Maybe in some sense you could even say makes some mistakes. You take those brains out for a walk. You take the legs out for a walk each day, and there's a little bit of tearing up of the muscles, and of course you're using your peripheral nervous system a lot as well. And the damage and the repair is benefited by having some brain-derived neurotropic factor be released in the body. It's called brain-derived, but it isn't just derived from the brain. It's really comes from other areas. Well, that chemical, that growth hormone, crosses what's called the blood-brain barrier, which is the sort of protective way the brain keeps itself from getting a lot of poisons and bad stuff. Keeps bad stuff out more effectively than other organs of the body. Of course, well, brain-derived neurotropic, the barrier is crossed by this chemical, by the BDNF, by the brain-derived neurotropic factor. So the exercise you do in your body, despite the fact that the chemical is being produced by your body to repair the part of your body you've been using, it also gets into the brain. And the brain grows, and cognition ultimately grows as a result of the physical exercise. It's cool, and I think of it as nature's mistake, but It's a happy mistake from the standpoint of what it does for us. I want to spend, since we're oriented towards happiness, you understand, I'm sure, since I started, that everything that we're talking about by way of keeping the brain healthy, keeping the neurochemistry balanced and so forth, is going to contribute to your well-being. After all, people don't get happy when they start getting demented. You know, when people are experiencing cognitive decline, that's one of the most stressful, awful things, especially when you're still at that point where you recognize that it's happened. That's bad stuff. So keeping you happy is in part just plain keeping brain healthy, but it's also keeping levels of things like the dopamine, which we started with, up to the level it should be. And dopamine is one of those neurochemicals that is stimulated, that does both have short-term impacts from things like cognitive stimulation and exercise, positive short-term impacts on dopamine levels, and also positive long-term impacts. The long-term impacts happen because these activities that toughen us, like exercise and cognitive stimulation, don't just change the way genes function immediately, don't just change the proteins that the genes are kicking out right after they get activated. But those activities also change the long-term responsivity of the genes. In other words, they change the way the genes function in the long term. If you have a child, so we're going to reach to the opposite of happiness for a moment. If you have a child who's experiencing a great deal of neglect and abuse, then it changes the way the genes function that are responsible for producing both brain-derived neurotrophic factor and the receptors for that chemical. It decreases the ability of those genes to produce that chemical and to produce the receptors for that chemical in the future. And it changes the way the genes produce them in a way that affects that kid for a lifetime. A severely abused child will never be the same individual. That doesn't mean they can't grow up and be a fine person or a smart person even, but they won't be as fine and smart as they would have been had they not had those kinds of experiences, if they were severe experiences. Those prints on the brain, on the genes, can last for a lifetime. It's a whole new science. It's called epigenetics, and it has to do with how genes become more easily activated or more difficult to activate in the future. Fancy terms like methylation and acetylation that describe, on the one hand, the decreasing sensitivity in the gene, that's the methylation, and the acetylation, the increasing sensitivity of some genes. So you can also increase the sensitivity of genes. And so really good nurturing is going to not only increase, well, forget the not only, it's going to increase your capacity to generate estrogen and oxytocin and other chemicals that you associate with the real topic of our conference here, happiness and feeling good and so forth. So you can kill with bad experiences in life. You can kill the way genes function, or you can enhance the way genes function. Let's talk a little bit about nutrition. Nutrition is always positive. Oh, well, it's not always positive. It's eating positive. A couple of the things that I wanted to leave you before departing here. Diets really do make a difference, and most of you are aware of what the Mediterranean diet is. at some level anyway, or the MIND diet. The MIND is it's always in capital letters, MIND, all caps, because it stands for Mediterranean something or other in DASH. The DASH diet is that diet that's created for people who have cardiovascular issues. That tends to be low in saturated fats and salt and so forth. So anyway, both diets have proven themselves to be at least as effective as this new Alzheimer's drug that's hit the market. Well, it's just been approved by the FDA. You've probably read about it recently, within the last couple of months. It's a drug that'll slow down the progression of dementia in people who are already experiencing mild dementia by something like 25% a month or something of that sort. And most of the stuff that I've written about I have a recent book, much more recent than the one that Judy just inherited, that is about nutrition in the age of gray. And most of the nutrition chapters in that book that deal with fats of various sorts and so on and so forth are actually more effective than this damn new drug that costs you something in the neighborhood of $1,500 a month if you were to get it. So and not only do diet things like that have those levels of impact on brain and cognition, but so do the activities that I've been pushing so hard, cognitive stimulation, physical exercise, and so forth. The level of impact that they had on brain preservation, on cognitive preservation, is way more than this brand new, everybody's celebrating expensive Alzheimer's drug. Prevention for everything is usually cheaper and more effective than cures, as everybody here knows.
Right.
So a couple of the things I would mention real quickly, besides taking a look at things like the Mediterranean diet, the MIND diet, that they emphasize consuming fruits and vegetables, being aware that there are some fats that are really good for you, the monounsaturated and the polyunsaturated fats. So this means essentially olive oil in the first case, and fish oil or omega-3s in the second case. Those are really, really important for the brain. And it's always interesting, by the way, to get into the dietary literature, because almost none of it deals with brains and cognitions. When you'll get these headlines in the newspaper that say, well, we've just shown that multivitamins are great for you, or that saturated oils are worse than these, and so forth. But almost always the worse or better has to do with cardiovascular issues, or once in a while cancer, diabetes, sugar control, things of that sort. Very seldom do they focus on brains and cognition. And some of the literatures that you're likely to be interested in, like for example, the literature on lifetime estrogen levels, very important for women. The impacts that they have on brain are really important, and they almost never get discussed. It's heart attacks and cancers that get discussed, but not cognition, not brain. So something to keep in mind as you get into thinking about doing some research yourself. And by the way, researching things like nutrient impacts on cognition is just not all that tough. Google Scholar is the way you go. You just simply jump into, on your computer, Google Scholar, not just on Google. If you say to Google, what's the impact of eggs on cognition, or spermidine, which is a important component of, I'm sorry, choline, which is an important component of eggs. If you just ask that question, you get a whole lot of newspaper articles and often well-written science magazine articles and stuff. Google Scholar is where you find the research. And it's scary at first because, you know, if you put in a couple of keywords like review spermidine cognition, it's big list, instantly, big list of journal articles. And you say, oh, this is pretty intimidating. Even the titles are pretty intimidating. But then, you know, you read the abstracts, you start to read the abstracts, you read them very carefully, and often you find understandable. It's saying ultimately, this is really good for your brain, or this is, and if it's a review and it's a modern review, where the researchers have consolidated the information from dozens, sometimes hundreds of papers on that thing. Often you can be pretty satisfied. You're getting the real stuff. And it's important to think about doing that once in a while because on the web, otherwise, you're probably seeing the same thing I am. You're seeing these marvelous developments, always by some doctor somewhere who's got a company that makes this stuff. Of combinations of things that will absolutely make you much, much smarter in a very, very short period of time. Almost always right. But you know, there are ways to find the real dope. You know, you just look at the ingredients. Anyway, okay. Couple of the monounsaturated, polyunsaturated oils are really good for you. Obviously, you can't overdo it because they got tons of calories, and that could be a problem. Polyunsaturated are things like omega-3s, esters, monos like olive oil. Olive oil is not just good because the oil is good on stuff, but because it's full of wonderful chemicals called polyphenols. Many phenol molecules of many different kinds. And there's some great research. Most nutrition research is correlational, but there's some great clinical research in which, for example, so in one of the studies I'm thinking of, can't remember which country in Europe. Anyway, 4 years of buying people extra virgin olive oil in one condition, they got a liter a week because I expect they thought they were sharing it with their families. So randomly assigning people to counseling about diet and 2 other groups, one with one kind of olive oil, another with another kind of olive oil. 4 years, these people get this stuff, and they get very good, thorough cognitive tests before and after. Some of them are essentially IQ tests. Makes a difference. It makes a difference to have the olive oil over 4 years in terms of brain IQ. 4 or 5 IQ points, I believe they calculated at the end of this particular study. There were a lot of people, there were 450 or so people in this research. So enough that you knew this was real. There are studies like that out there. So you pay attention to the oils. Don't forget everything that's got a lot of color in the vegetable fruit line tends to be rich in various positive chemicals. That's the blueberries, which, you know, you've heard so much about in the last couple of decades. Well, yeah, that's real. I mean, that's not one of those hype things that, because most farmers aren't making all that much money by hyping their blueberries. So colorful fruits and vegetables too, green leafy vegetables, mushrooms. Most people don't think about mushrooms. Really good for the brain. There are a couple of chemicals that are especially effective antioxidants. You would tell me if I'm running over, wouldn't you?
Probably. Let's see. Let's see. Hey. Yeah, 2 more minutes.
2 more minutes. Okay. Gosh, I can do this in 2 minutes. Whenever energy is created in any part of your body, muscle, brain, neurons, whatever, it's because of these little organelles called mitochondria. They're really tiny. They're thought to be bacteria back in the old days that somehow got incorporated into we organisms with cells. There are literally thousands of them within a cell. I mean, they're that small. The mitochondria are what change fuel, glucose, and to some extent fats, into energy. And through a process that I'm not going to even attempt to describe. The mitochondria age with us. They have their own genes. By the way, they come from our moms. Mothers pass on in their egg the mitochondria that we all then get. Sperm do not carry any mitochondria at all along with them. They don't pack a lunch, so to speak, unlike the eggs, which can be very, very large. So the mitochondria have their own genes that come through their mother. That's an interesting story. Mitochondria are kept healthy by the nutrition that we consume. The nutrition that is most effective for mitochondria comes from mushrooms. Anything that's an antioxidant is helping our mitochondria to survive. So all things like vitamin C and the orange juice you drink and so on and so forth, anything that's high in antioxidants helps mitochondria. The problem with mitochondria is when they take something like a sugar molecule and turn it indirectly through some steps into energy, they also release as a byproduct a particularly hungry form of oxygen molecule called a reactive oxygen species for some strange reason. And this especially active, potent oxygen molecule tends to grab onto things like DNA molecules and RNA molecules and so forth and hurt them in the long term. And that's what partly, and is thought by some people to be almost entirely, causes our aging, is too much rusting, if you like, too much rusting of things like DNA and RNA and so forth. So you keep the mitochondria healthy, and you are having an impact on one of the major influences of brain aging. Mushrooms. 2 things that you've never heard of in mushrooms that are extremely important. One's called ergothioneine. Try that 2 times in a row. And another is spermidine. You won't hear much about these, but modern science is looking at them very closely, saying these are the fountains of life. Okay, questions? And you get to tell how much time we've got for questions. Yes.
2 things. First, Dick, I don't think you may have the oldest or most senior brain here.
I bet I do.
I hit the big H0 some months ago.
I'm 4 years older than you.
It's all mushrooms. Technical question. You said choline. I missed part of what choline is.
Choline, yes. As in acetylcholine, CHOLINE, eggs, think eggs. Also, you can the supplements you would get through the drugstore, through Amazon, cheap Yes,
Should we exercise more to fix all the bad things that we've done to our brain over our lives?
it would, your brain would thank you.
Yeah. Does it matter what kind?
No, actually, it doesn't. It's better if you do it enough, like, 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, the usual recommendations for aerobic. And nowadays, folks are talking much more about resistance exercise and doing that a couple times a week if you've got time or energy for it.
Thanks.
All right.
I would think.
Okay, I thought of some housekeeping things. Are you pressed for time?
No.
Okay, well, we'll take a little break here, but, there's some waters over here. And I think with the number of people, I didn't know how many people there'd be, but like all the books on that bar table over there, like peruse it, grab any books that you want from there. Restrooms are kind of around the corner back here. And I brought some art. If you like some of it, it's like there's some very fine text on one of the pieces of art over there. It's kind of cool. There's also some yoga mats back here if anyone wants to stretch out. Where'd Paul go? I think Paul just stepped out, but he'll show you some stretches if you're interested in learning some stretches. And yeah, let's maybe take 5 and we'll get started in 5. So, okay.
Spectacular.
I'm trying to stop. I don't even know. It matters to me. Hey, thank you so much. It's so funny. I see like funny things behind that box. And I'm like, that's it. Wow. I did. I know you were like to reflect for it. I think really good. Yeah. Have you seen pictures? No, I haven't. Yeah, so it's this sort of. So. Like alligators. Korean like like my kind of yeah. It's so actually like who does that? We all went downtown and I was like, oh my god, like yeah, just so wow. Did you get tons of like yeah. Yeah, well there's this one like walked by the bar and just like saw us and like came in wanted to hang out with us. And like half of my friends were trying to hit on her, and I was like, you need to calm down. And she's very cute. Okay. And then she called her friends, Dungeons and Dragons friends. I was like, oh, this girl. There's these, and so then all of a sudden these other people are like not quite as dressed up as we were. And like there's a wizard hat, and like a big axe, like they came in, so, like yeah. On in Lincoln. I'm sorry, I was areas in the bar. I was stopped too. I would stop whatever I was doing. I would be late to my next appointment. I would schedule and I would go hang out with Barry. Yeah, that's yeah. It's funny. Like it's like I didn't know until today. I knew that you would be on camera, right? Today, but I didn't know if you weren't here when I was. Yeah, but I was like, no, so this was just last minute, right? No, this is last. Okay, I was like, hey, girl. No, you can't. The best. Yeah, that's one. I'll just all those mine. I know, right? You know, it's the backfield now. It's like that. Is it snowing? It's mega snowy, look. Supposed to be, I didn't see it.
Well, like it's just really kind of.
Yeah, this is for these signed ones over here. Everyone grab a.
Okay.
One.
Put my name on it.
Yeah, you just take one. Drop one in there and take one.
I seen her so long, I was trying to find it on the way here. Was it the Alliance of this community? Or you? Good. Yeah. I went to one stand and I heard.
It-
Event, and since we were starting to see it. Very.
Expensive to join, I never joined.
I've been in and out.
It's really great.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't keep up with all this. Yeah, I know, it's crazy.
I actually, I live,
I've been 10 years. I should have students. I'll be back. I need to take her back to the second.
Oh,
So that's really, it's moving along and maybe this year I can. This one that I just.
so it's good, and I'm doing the workshops. What I can manage.
Yes. And our computer. Stuff, but. Now.
I'm so happy I was.
Oh, I'm
To be my yeah, oh my God, I think it's like that. Yes, so it's too. And actually, I want to go. To go.
Oh, I'm sure. And did you get some bugs?
I did, yeah.
I was thinking about that, what feeling like,
We're always, you know, trying to.
out of like,
I believe that was too.
yeah.
Great. Did that go pretty fine?
That's not there's any that.
Yeah, for the girl.
I understand.
We want to do this other stuff. Expert.
Yeah, that's.
I love that. With my, that I was like, myself.
How did she?
You see rivals that have started 5 years ago and they're.
Yeah.
Is because.
Yeah, I was actually.
Yes. It's leaders.
Not enough.
Oh, never.
Yeah.
My favorite camp for you. Yeah.
Well, pushing back a little bit, but, eventually, let's see, the poet, where's our poet? Oh, there. Okay. Um, Poetry, I heard poetry being read with the graduate students, at a bar downtown, and just was fascinated by the poetry. And, I think that, you know, it's just, there's something incredible about what poets do with words. And, let's see if we can get Maria up here to read some poetry for us. Let's hear it.
That's not a chord there, I would trip over. Hi, everyone, welcome back. So anybody in the back row, if you don't hear me, I've never been quiet, it's never been a problem, but like, please do put a finger up if you're not hearing me project. Okay, you're funny. You are funny. Okay, no, this is a great way to kick things off. I'm so happy to be here today. Thank you so much, Nick, for putting this event together. As I was telling my husband yesterday, and as everyone already knows, so it's kind of redundant to say, but Nick is awesome. Since I met him in Lincoln, probably one of the first people I'd met about 11 years ago as a PhD student. And ever since then, he's just been trucking along. So this is excellent. I am going to read from my collection of poetry translations. I spent a decade translating a Greek poet named Dimitra Kotoula. And I'm also going to read from some of my newer poems from my forthcoming book. It's taken 15 years and it's going to come out in 2026. So that's no time. Thank you. It's another 2 years. Who cares? It's all good. I know it's the publisher's like, well, do you? I'm like, just no, stop right there. I am ecstatic. So I thought I would open up with one of my many poems about bars. And this one is titled very aptly Happy Hour.
A woman with a feathered haircut droops like a lily over the bar. She's lost her credit card again. God damn it, she says, dumping out her wallet. And her kids, they say she ruined their life. What do they know about life, she says? What do they know about ruining? After her 6th shot of Jameson, she keeps examining the wallet's contents on the bar. She touches each card as if reading tea leaves before almost pitching off the stool. Who hasn't been there? They don't bring you anything but heartache, she says to no one. The slender bartender gently tells her she's cut off. A man no more than 30, in a flannel and baseball hat, who is just informed the same, slides beside her and takes her hand. We watch from the end of the bar as he ushers her onto the empty dance floor. They begin to spin like 2 tangled marionettes. He holds her as if grasping a sinking ship's splintered mast. He's the captain, or maybe they're both survivors, having stayed upright this long. She rests her head on his shoulder. It's too early to dance, too late to find love, but he buries his face in her hair, and then the bartender takes my hand and lifts me from my stool, and another townie follows as if pushed by an invisible breeze. Over their shoulders, as we move arm in arm to the music, I hear the woman tell her new companion that she doesn't drive too many OWIs, but lives right down the street. Holding hands, they stumble out of the swinging double doors, and light floods in, and still we dance, dumbstruck and sun-stunned, brushed by the tip of an angel's broken wing, only to see that it belongs to the person swaying beside us. Thank you. Yeah, if you ever see a random Greek chick, curly hair, twirling around in the bar alone, that's me. No judgment. So the next poem, and it's another one that is kind of about happiness too, and it's about how I've learned in my life to be happy about the problems that I encounter now as like normal person problems, not consistent disasters. You know, I'm not like getting stranded at borders. I'm not like suddenly like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. I'm not funny and I woke up with a crazy person. And no, like these are like the good problems now in my life. And this poem is aptly titled Self-Portrait as a Clogged Toilet. It's one of the normal problems. I'm like, yes, this is what normal people have. For once, a disaster you can control. Wild, wet rat girl, hunkered at the bottom of your self-made sewer. Now the tide flows over your great white goblet. You need to clink it with another giant glass. Here's to normal people problems you bent your head in prayer for before at the same pale bowl after drinking too much yellowtail because whatever half mad man you loved sank deeper into his own drink, went fishing with another girl, or stained your door with his manic shadow. Some days you have to praise the simple outpouring of your own shit. Here's to skid-marked years you soiled your reputation. A tired angel held back your hair, patient as a reflection, only for you to cough and plunge into another older man's arms. Whatever weary force turned back clean blood tests, whatever unnameable thing expelled bad choices from your body must be knelt before like a porcelain altar. Now you watch the bowl erupt what you thought was contained onto the white tile floor. Maybe this is God's giant phone, those years you called and just heard the ringing of your hungover, off the hook head. Perhaps there was always the answer. Maybe not the one you wanted, but maybe the one you needed, telling you, don't cry over spilled crap, telling you, rise and scrub up your human mess. And now sewage floods your floor, and still you wade out into the dirty, blessed waters of what you swore you left behind for good. Thank you. And this one is titled Love is a Light Bulb, and I wrote it especially for a friend of mine who got married. And yeah, I'm just very delighted for her. Oh, and also, just to embarrass my husband, who happily doesn't get embarrassed. There he is. Hi, Andy. So actually the poem begins and opens with a line from Andy. Andy, oh, you've heard me read this before, I think. On one of our dates, he showed up. It was our second date, I think. And I came to the door, and I was used to very like transactional relationships with like lots of sketchy people. And he shows up to come pick me up, and he produces a light bulb for me. And he goes, here. I'm like, what? And he was like, I don't know if you noticed this, but one of the bulbs in your bathroom was out. I brought you a light bulb. And I'm like, and I literally, I remember holding my door open and I stepped backwards so that I closed the door on my head. Like, just out of like severe shock, because I couldn't believe that somebody would just be so considerate and detail oriented and just kind. That was very, very foreign to me. So that was kind of how I knew that he was the one. That among other little things, but that was a big one for me. Yeah.
A light bulb.
A light bulb. Yeah, like literally, I was like, you remember that, right? Like, were you upset when I did that? I'm like, no, I just didn't understand how to handle that. I'm like, how are you paying attention to my bathroom lights and bringing me light bulbs? So, love is a light bulb that a man you barely know, picking you up for your second date, hands you for a bathroom fixture that you didn't even know was out. Love is when the lights are out, when your sweaty body sags and sighs against the weight of your equal. Love is an equal sign, the answer to when you want to gently stick his head between banister rails. No offense. It's the same symbol that stops him from doing the same to you. Love is cat vomit encrusted on the rug. It's the 99th time you've told him you don't need to use a public computer to book plane tickets because a Chrome incognito window works just fine. And still he doesn't believe you. Love is a plane ticket out of Eden without a destination. Love is a Ferrari without a steering wheel. A woman who, once in a fit of rage, grabbed the steering wheel out of your hands while you were driving on the highway. It's the person who holds back your sick world's hair while it pukes comets. Love is looking at someone in hunger and not eating them. Love is those times we trail a lengthy shadow. Love is the window that stands between us. Love is standing at the window at dawn, wrapped in a blanket. Love is when you hand someone a loaded gun and say, don't shoot. It's when you put your hands up, step out of the vehicle, slowly stoop to wave a dirty napkin. It's when you keep waving that tiny white flag, always and forever, even in the middle of the darkest, longest night. Thank you. I think I'm doing okay on time. Nick was kind enough you were raffling some of my books along with Ted's, right? Ted Kuzer's, awesome. Yeah, my honorary grandpa, I spent way too much time working as his assistant. His book and mine are over there. If you'd like to raffle them, I'm also selling them for $20. So just to shamelessly self-promote, I'm about to read some of the Greek poetry translations I have. This was hard. She's not a very happy poet. I adore her work, but I had to like dig deep here. But I found some very like ecstatic poems she's written. This one is titled 3 Notes for One Melody. Truth is that I like to watch, slipping deeply back in time into the forbidden chambers with the ancient remains of forefathers. I've not become any wiser, but I love to let myself get carried away as the summer clarion fades by the splendid chords of forgotten poets. And I, gracious or even wretched, long for the living sob that tries to break away from me, crawling through the dark, shifting balances, seeking an emotional, more rich sky. Truth is that I still insist to claim, gently, distant, as a lily, if you wish, that ultimate destination, the only destination which leads nowhere, to no spring, has no death, no time or sun in the answer. Yeah. Then this one is Moods 10. The epigraph isn't very happy, but I would argue that the poem is. The melancholy seeped into me. I drip poetry. So I guess that's not a bad thing. You can drip worse things in poetry, right? I'm an eternal optimist. Tonight, I am excited. The sharp logic of this thankless and demanding art for once holds off. Come, we could, if you wish, walk together through long museum halls in love with their own statues. Survey the piercing doubt of the master's brushstroke below the soaked cloth. The marble, a wild surface prepared for drawing. We could surely, if you like, make a little music. It will be treasured and carefree. It will rise ever so slowly, but always with a trusted measure of even 4-time beats. Come, do not deny me. Besides, what will it cost? Bring along this moment and this page, this moment here on this page, my one asset. Call them off. For tonight, faithful to the virtue of tears, in a time of cynical confessions, I can, worthy and triumphant, for once, and only this once, defend you. So then I will close with one of her /our last poems, Escape or the Words. She has only to wait. They will find her, streaming over her like delicate fingers that outlasted the wait, exhausting the density between pauses until time becomes space, again, inner space, until she can listen to the garden work quietly, again. Meanwhile, they ripple the air and are gone, exposing her brutally to the birds singing, tormenting the atmosphere with long, creeping strokes. Imagine them, an eternal walkabout against the symbolic or the beautiful, beyond that which hesitates or awaits in anticipation, studies in incarnation. They have their own way to pain her. They have their own way to leave. Each time more stubborn and more intimate, they abandon her and I watch. They flood their absence and leave. They grant her silence and leave. As if something beyond their roots is calling for them, something faded, more sheltered than the low relief of springtime sea. That has always been, or rather was. The dew will gather like grapes and she won't be there. Cold rain will light the night. It is important to entrust everything to this flight, to let them mercifully finish their work. A page full of words is a page drowned in ragweed. Fiery leaves of elms shimmer, tiny bright red screams against my window pane. We know nothing about the ending. We cannot see through to the end. We cannot see beyond it. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, maybe we'll raffle some books off real quick here, and then we'll have a panel. Who would like raffle tickets? Would anybody?
What can you do to interact?
Was that?
What do I need to do to interact?
Take one.
Oh dear.